In this demo, I'm going to show you how to create a princess seam from shoulder on the back bodice. Alright, so we've done the front bodice, now we'll do the back. Here we already have a dart coming from our waist and one from our shoulder. Alright, all we really need to do, if these darts are lining up pretty well, which these are, is connect the two dart tips. So let's start with that. So I'm going to use my curved ruler, and I'm going to plot out a line here. I'm going to find a nice gentle curve that connects my shoulder dart tip to my waist dart tip. I think right about there looks good. And I'll just go ahead and connect them. There we go. I'm also just going to draw on a notch, and I'll use actually the dart tips as my notch, or notches, so when I sew this together. And now I can cut this out. Okay, so we're going to get rid of our the shoulder dart seam allowance and our waist dart seam allowance, and then we'll just cut out from dart tip to dart tip, separating our two pieces. Alright, so here's our center back and one piece, okay, and then our center side seam, our other piece comes to there. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and cut up the dart leg here to dart tip, and then I'll cut out my other dart leg to dart tip. There we go. And remove that seam allowance. Same thing on shoulder. Go ahead and just remove the seam allowance from that shoulder dart. And there we are. Now, I'm just going to cut down that plot line from dart tip to dart tip, separating the two pieces. There we go. Alright, so let's start with our center back piece. Put that piece aside for a moment. Let's put down a placement line. Here's my placement line. And now we put center back right here. We also want to create a balance line coming off of this. That balance line will be squared off our placement line, and we're going to make it so it lines up with the bust line on the back. So I'm just going to mark that bust line, and then I'll use that as a guide to draw in my balance line. I'm going to extend that across my paper. There we go. Alright, so let's go ahead and place center back right against our placement line and line up our bust line with our balance line. That looks good. We'll tape this on. And we can go ahead and trace this off. Okay, neckline trace, come down shoulder, and then down what is now our princess seam. And across waist. Transfer our two notches. There we are. I don't need to transfer my bust line because I already have one. That's my balance line. Okay, so we've transferred everything. Let's remove a working pattern. Again, this is center back right here. Okay, and now we can go ahead and perfect this using our rulers. So up a curve at waist. Make sure we square off at intersection of center back and waist for a ½ inch, and same thing at center back and side seam. Okay, square it off there. Now we can go ahead and perfect our curves and the rest of our lines. Okay. One thing I want to check here is my shoulder. I have a front princess seam, and when I sew my shoulder seam, I want to make sure that this back princess seam lines up with my front princess seam. So you can either grab the front princess seam you've made already, or use your working patterns, which I have right now. And I'll line up, here's my front princess seam working pattern. Here's center front, neckline, shoulder. I'm going to line up neckline and shoulder. Make sure that they line up. So I'll start it at neckline. Make sure that lines up. And that looks good. Okay, so they line up. Put that aside. And I'll continue perfecting this. And just find a curve that matches. There we go. And then we have our two notches here and right there. Okay, so there's the first part of our back princess seam. Let's do the other part. This part extends to armhole. Right, so I'm going to take my bust line that I have on here and line it up with that balance line that I already drew. There we go. And I'll just tape it down. A couple spots. There we go. And now we can go ahead and trace it off. Don't forget to transfer your darts with your tracing wheel. Or sorry, not your darts, but your notches. And we can remove our working pattern. Now let's take our front princess seam that has the armhole and side seam on it and make sure the shoulders not match up there. So here's my front side princess panel. Okay, so here's side seam, armhole, shoulder. And make sure that this lines up correctly. And that looks good. So these match. I can now go ahead and perfect this. And I'm just smoothing out this curve. A little bump out there, I just smooth that out. Make sure you perfect all your notches. And this is where the two dart tips were. They're now notches. And I have my directional notches in my back armhole. Okay. And now we can add our grain line. On the back panel, our grain line will be parallel with center back. And perpendicular with our bust line. So there's my grain line for my back. And then on my side panel, it will be parallel or perpendicular to bust line. There we are. So that is our back princess seam from shoulder.